We should be live everywhere. Welcome, everybody, including those live on LinkedIn, those live on webinar, and those eventually seeing this on YouTube. Today, we're exploring the promise and peril of AI in healthcare. What's real? What's hype? Need to know to navigate to transform this responsibly. I'm Dr. Doreen Galley, Chief of Research at TBW Advisors LLC. And it might be good to denote I'm a doctorate in computer science, not in healthcare today. I'm not a medical practitioner, but I am an expert in technology and in data, including AI. So we got you covered. Welcome to Industry Whispers, AI in Healthcare, Promise or Peril. We have an amazing panel today. Please see the event description for detailed bio information. This event is copyrighted by TBW Advisors LLC, all rights reserved. No AI note takers. Apologize. Now let's get into setting the stage. We'll commence with Dr. Barry Chaikin, whose background includes the CDC, serving as the HIMSS chair and author of Future Healthcare 2050. Barry, when you hear AI in healthcare, what's the biggest promise you see, and what's the most overlooked peril?
Well, first off, let's start with the positive, if we may. Clearly, we'll be able to use AI for tremendous advances in research, in pharmacology, in therapies, things like that. But what I'm really excited about is the opportunity to apply AI in a way that patients have more control over their care. And what I'm meaning is not telling the doctor what to do, but becoming a member of the caregiver team, because we can now use AI so that the caregiver and the caregiver's institution can have a way using AI to interact with that person on almost a regular basis and in a way that is personalized exactly to them based upon their education, their disease, their language, their culture, so that in almost in every day you can be interacting with your caregiver. The AI functioning is that to guide you through the days between when you see your various caregivers. Additionally, it educates the patient about their disease, so when they do see their caregiver, they can be a much better historian. They can tell them more about how they're feeling about things, how the medication or the therapy is working for them, what their personal challenges are in following through with their therapeutics. All of this can greatly enhance how care is actually given. It can decrease cost, it can improve quality, and most importantly, it improves access, not only in a one-to-one relationship when you see your caregiver, but obviously afterwards in between those particular times. We talk a lot about all the great things that AI can do. That I think is really exciting, that you now brings the patient into the caregiver team to allow them to do what they do best, which is applying their understanding of healthcare and of medicine. And what you can do best is taking advantage and taking care of yourself. Perils. I'm scared about misinformation and hallucinations. I have a warning for everyone. Do not go to AI, put in your symptoms, and try to diagnose and treat yourself. AI has not been made for that, at least the AI that all of us have access to through the various tools. There are 5 or 6 of them. All of you use one or the other, whether it's ChatGPT, Anthropic, Grok, Copilot, Gemini. All of those things are great, but not for treating yourself. If you want to learn about a disease, sure, you can go in and look at it, but don't use it as a therapeutic tool because it has not been designed for that. Specifically for us physicians, we do use it, many of us use a tool. It's called open evidence. It only has and only been trained on clinical data. We know how it has been trained. We know the data it's using. It gives us references, and we apply our personal knowledge and understanding of healthcare and medicine using it. But it's not something that we would ever go out to the general AI tools out there to go help us make decisions about your care.
Very insightful. That evidence sounds like a great tool to help augment your memory and all the training you had to go. Now, what was that when you put these 3 together? Because there's such an extensive knowledge set. Let's go to Susie Brannigan, whose background includes 25 years of ICU, pediatric psychiatry, and hospice leadership as a nurse. Susie, when you hear AI in healthcare, what's the biggest promise you see, and what's the most overlooked peril?
All right, great. Thank you for having me. And Barry, I love how you started with the patient because it's patient first as always. So that's a great little segue into what I was going to add to that, which is as a nurse manager over many years, the staff are just as important as the patient because if you don't have staff that feel like they have a great environment and a non-toxic workplace, then the patient isn't going to get the best care, right? So for AI and the biggest promise, I would say and what I've already seen so far as a manager of a child psychiatry unit is giving back the staff more time to be able to be at the bedside is really important. Specific tools that I have used as a manager really allow the staff to feel like they can do the things that they went to school for, like why they became a nurse or a tech, which is going in, sitting with the patient, listening to them, rubbing a back, holding a hand, taking them for a walk, things like that we really don't have time for anymore. I mean, the days of, 3 walks a day to keep patients ambulatory, it's a great thought, but it's so far, it's such an outreach for the staff at this point because of all the documentation they have to do. So what I see that it's really streamlining the clinician's work, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, or whatever, and it's also holding everybody accountable in the same way, which is nice. So any tools that I've used on my units. They really help to, they have some great reports that you can pull as a leader to see, how is everybody doing with compliance to make sure patients aren't falling or, having seizures or self-harming, things like that. And then you're able to utilize Just Culture to make sure that everyone's learning. So I've loved what I've seen so far. I haven't had a staff member complain about the use of any products we've used. If anything, it's helping them get through their day, and it helped me get through my day too and be able to sleep at night because I knew that patients were really being checked on, and it was a really foolproof system. And that gets me into kind of the peril that I see. So I'll talk a lot about today. You'll see, something that I specialize in is trauma and PTSD in the workplace and healthy work environments. And what we need to make sure we do before we implement any AI on any sort of in any sort of hospital or healthcare setting is to make sure that the unit itself is healthy and has a healthy culture first. You're not going to be able to adopt any new product, technology, EHR, anything, if you have a staff full of, mistrust, inappropriate behaviors, major medication errors, staff not getting along with each other. You really have to take a pulse on your unit first and fix those issues and make sure staff feel really supported by their leadership and using Just Culture and everything so that staff feel like they can come to leadership to let them know if they see something off in the AI product that they're using or whatnot. If there's no trust and there's no proper appreciation of the staff members' feedback and the patient's feedback, you're not going to get anywhere and people are not going to adopt that technology. I've seen it happen as a manager, hence why I made sure that any unit I ran, I started with the culture first before we agreed to implement anything new. And then it became a pretty awesome opportunity and people were really, taking it in nicely because they felt supported. So hopefully that answers your question. Psychological safety is what I look for. So.
Excellent. And that's a great perspective. I always like to say bad news doesn't get better with time, but in order to have the bad news get to you if something isn't working, regardless of what it is, including new AI tech, you need to have a culture where it's a safe environment for them to come and speak up and say, this is wrong. It's not
Well,
working.
they are the end users, and we have to absolutely respect the end user's perspective because they're the ones using it all day long, every day, all 3 shifts. So if we're not open to that, like, having forums, monthly meetings, an open email system, an open, I used to do anonymous drop boxes where you didn't even have to say your name. If you just want to put a note near my door and unless I knew your handwriting, I probably couldn't figure it out. And that's not the point. It was, you want to create an environment where people that are doing the work feel like they had a part in all of it, So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now heading over to the tech part of AI in healthcare, introducing Chris Hutchins, whose background includes over 2 decades as a chief data officer, data and analytics officer in healthcare at massively large systems, both at LifePoint Health and Norwell Health in New York. Chris, when you hear AI in healthcare, what's the biggest promise you see, and what's the most overlooked peril?
Well, first, thanks for pulling us together. I think that the very first parts of our conversation are exactly why this is so important. The biggest, the most exciting thing for me is the ability that AI has to be able to, well, I guess, amplify care delivery, I guess is a better way or a way to be thinking about it, particularly in underserved areas, because there's scarcity of resources. In particular, there's clinical resources, whether it's physicians or nurses. So we need to figure out how do we use this capability to enable really efficient workflows. The exciting part to me is, just thinking about being able to use predictive analytics that will flag a deteriorating patient condition early, or the ambient listening tools that can reduce administrative burden on the clinicians. It can actually extend capacity and surface insights in real time. I think that's a really important thing for us to be thinking about and solving, because the proliferation of data growth is insane. And we have not done a good job creating capacity for clinicians to be able to process information in a normal human pace. We just haven't. So we need to make sure that we're doing the things that pop up what's really, really relevant in real time. If we can do that, then it's going to enable the human judgment to occur, and we can actually help to enable the decision-making process with much more complete information than we could without this technology. The peril, I think the easiest thing that I can say about that is I think we just heard the peril. If you design your solutions without the benefit of Dr. Chaikin or Susie Brannigan or whoever these people are in your organization, the big mistake that you can have there is that you are building something that is not solving or improving a workflow. You're adding layers and you're adding steps, you're increasing the burden, and you're not only increasing the likelihood of cognitive overload, you're risking burnout. You're contributing to something that's very, very real. And the interaction with the patient cannot be the last thought. So we need the people that are closest to that to be the ones that we're listening to. So we don't want to do well, I'll build it and hope someone needs it. We've done that far too long in healthcare. We need to start by listening to the experts like we have available to us today. Tell us where the pain points are, and let's figure out how we can use technology together. But I'm not going to run away with some great information and go build something in a vacuum and then come back and spring it on them. It's a partnership that has to be in place, and you won't find it hard to find empathetic leaders like the two we have on the panel with us today. They're itching to have you work on the things that really are going to make a difference.
Absolutely. It's all about keeping the highly trained medical professionals using that highly trained medical professional skill as much of the time as possible, and the mundane, boring things handled by the technology out of the way so that most of the time they're doing what they're trained for. And I think most medical practitioners would be more than delighted to spend most of their time with their patients. So, and that's true of everywhere. I mean, even in media, the research we've done in media, they're like, get rid of the mundane tasks. And so AI in for the mundane is always a win. But there's some additional. Sticking with Chris, how do you define responsible AI in healthcare today?
Well, I think it starts on a really basic level. And first, we'll be talking a lot about this over the next several months to come, but trust is really, really important. And so you really have to make sure that you've got the right intent, start there, understand that until you have accountability figured out, you haven't completed the design cycle. So it means developing and deploying tools that are ethically sound, they're clinically aligned, and transparently governed. We can't afford to deploy and hope. I think we've done that far too often. It requires clinical validation, bias monitoring, and most importantly, embedding human insight into the decision loop. So yes, we have to worry about compliance, but there's a trust component that is actually even further in front of that compliance that we actually need to be paying attention to. As I mentioned in the previous question, we can't design for, we have to design with the people who are on the front line. And that's, for me, responsibility is to be building systems that serve people. We're not trying to replace them, and we don't want the technology to try to emulate human empathy, because people will trust technology. Oh, they already do, really, really quickly and easily. We need to make sure that we're putting the guardrails there. We're preserving that human judgment, because that human judgment has been trained and knows exactly what information is necessary to make a decision. Your AI knows what you tell it, and unfortunately, it assumes you've given it all the necessary information, and it'll give you a conclusion.
Good point. Susie, would you like to comment on responsible AI in healthcare?
Yeah, Chris, echoing everything I would have said already about, making sure that we have the input of the end user for sure, but also going back to the patient, I've sat with and talked with and rounding with all my patients in the past, asking them what their feedback was on the specific, technology we were using. We're always transparent about what we use. Anything that I have, have experience with so far has not had any cameras or anything talking to you in the room, which I highly agree with. And I try to, promote products that are not, are the least intrusive as possible. If you're already in a setting where patients are in for delirium, dementia, confusion overall, or just even in the psychiatry setting, when you have someone who came in with self-harm or suicidal ideation, the last thing that they want is having this thing in the room that looks like, Flight of the Navigator kind of thing staring at you. And what the feedback I've gotten is, I'm fine with the tools that you guys are using to keep me safe or to check on me. But I've had patient feedback that, if you're beginning to replace the empathy piece, that they're not going to buy that, right? So I've had patient complaints of, I haven't seen a staff member in a while. And after I've talked with that staff member, they've said, well, I've done my checks, the patient was safe. I checked off on the computer that everything was good. AI helped me make sure they haven't fallen, they haven't eloped, they haven't done this. But have you gone in and actually had a conversation with the patient today? Have you talked about how they're feeling and, what their, emotions are today, that type of thing. And so we have to make sure we balance both. Because at the end of the day, the patient is number one. And if they're laying in the bed feeling like the only thing watching them is a product on the wall, and that people have forgotten about, the actual empathy part, the human part, then we're going to get in trouble, and we're going to have patients that are not happy. And, I see how it can help, and I see how it can be a burden if it is not utilized appropriately. And then just making sure we have pause points all the time. So making sure that you're responsible to re-look at what you're using and see if there needs to be any tweaks. A lot of these companies that have these products, you can give feedback as to how it's going. And you're actually able to, even as someone who worked for a company as the vice president of clinical experience, the end user can give feedback as to what's not working with the product and what they suggest maybe enhancing with it or adding to it. And a lot of these companies can easily add personalized, customizable things. So it would be very responsible of the leadership of every organization utilizing these tools to really go to the meetings that are offered and give feedback. If you're just using the product and you're not giving any sort of feedback and having meetings with that team, then you're really selling yourself short, because there's a lot you can do with a particular product with your own input. So it's been great to see all the organizations I've worked with when working in AI, because everybody has different ideas and everyone has different units. Everyone has different staff members and how they cope with things. So making sure it's customizable for you is super important. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm
They're
passionate
not
about.
going to accommodate your desires if you don't let them know what you need in the product. So
Yeah,
tweak and they may just adjust the product to exactly fit what you need. What do you think,
yeah.
Susie, is the biggest opportunity for patient outcomes the next 5 years?
I would say, in the falls range, the seizure detection, I would say, elopement and self-harm, is huge. I kind of am biased because I come from such acute units, psychiatry units and ICUs. So what I'm really looking for and hoping for is to see, these products truly do what they say they're going to do without being intrusive. And, I want to see, data showing patterns. So, there's some awesome AI that's happening with the product that I was just on the team with, where they're able to detect certain behaviors during the day and then look at the patterns through the analytics, and then you can maybe adjust medications and whatnot. Say Sally every day in room 10 has been pacing in the room and then escalates. Well, let's look at the medication she was taking around 10 a.m. Okay. Do we need to adjust those doses and things like that? So I'm looking for, increased quality of care due to the fact that we have these analytics and we should be reading and looking at the reports of each patient. And decreased readmission rates because of that. So like being able to tackle what the real problem is and address it. Patients come in a lot to get their medications adjusted, but we don't really know where to start because we don't live with them every day and we don't know what they're really truly struggling with. So having these kind of reports in our pocket is going to be great. I'm trying to think anything else. I don't know, restoring joy in the practice, having nurses and techs and doctors actually look forward to coming into work and not dread how busy and traumatic their shift is going to be. Because if you put the responsibilities that they have during a shift with the traumas that they're going to absorb, secondary trauma, their own traumas, and then you add technology. I'm just looking for the technology to truly, support that and have the staff feel like they can breathe, go to the bathroom, eat lunch,
Free from the
stuff
mundane.
that nurses and techs and doctors have not been able to do for the 25 years that I've been in healthcare. As a manager, I even skip lunches and, things like that because there's just not enough time in the day. So that's what I'm
The
looking
one thing
forward
you
to
tell
seeing.
your patients never to do: don't skip your meals.
I know. Yeah.
Make sure
We
you
don't,
eat them on a regular time, not on a
yeah.
banana peel.
Yeah. We
Well,
don't
that's
take
great
our
that
own
nurses and
advice.
doctors will get to take care of themselves. But diving into tech, one of the things Chris and I are very well aware of is you can't do any of this AI unless your data's in order. So Chris, how can organizations ensure data quality before implementing AI? Because if they implement it without it, they're just going to get junk.
This is a real pain point, and sadly, it's kind of hidden beneath the layer that everyone knows about, which is really the technical debt that you have for the systems you deploy. But what's really important is organizations grow. They typically do that through acquisition, and they're onboarding new systems all the time. The process doesn't often include the work that would be necessary to normalize that data so that it can actually be fit for use. And if you're a physician and you're seeing patients that might have been seen at another location where you actually practice, this isn't theory. This is actually what it's like in reality. They oftentimes have to go through great lengths to get their hands on information that they know is out there, and they only know that because they were at another location. They know the data is not in front of them. The people who are building these solutions, they don't have an understanding of all of that. So we really have to be aware that the data is incredibly siloed. We may or may not have everything in one location that actually gives the full picture. So we have to be clearly aware of that and make sure that we're making it easy to detect it because we're normalizing the data. And we're doing that as much as we possibly can upstream before we start feeding it into an AI solution. We have to have a really sound foundation. And it really starts with governance. It's not really just a technical data validation. There's a lack of context that oftentimes exists in the data, but there's also some nuance where, discharge diagnosis might live in 3 different tables, and a technical person doesn't know that there's a timestamp that you need to be paying attention to really know what's the final diagnosis. So it's really, really important that the clinical expertise is part of that process in the design phase. When you're starting to ingest your data, you've got to do the unbelievably difficult and tedious task that only a handful of people in the world seem to really love to do, which is to profile that data, make sure it is fit for purpose, make sure that you've got some clinical experts that are looking at it and they're validating that, yes, this actually reflects what I see in clinical workflow, it reflects what I see in the user interfaces that I'm interacting with. So I would just say, emphasize early stage normalization. I think that's a really, really important thing to think about. If you're in your organization and you're struggling because some of your AI solutions aren't moving along the pace you need them to move along, I suspect you may have some problems with that, and you want to talk to your experts and your teams to find out where are the pain points, what's really causing the difficulty. Do we have sound models, or the models just not being compiled efficiently? We may have a lot of bumps in actually the data preps exercise. I've seen that countless times.
Yeah,
There's
the
no
problem's
understanding
crazy.
of that typically outside of the technical team that's doing it. And so
Yeah,
somebody has to be paying attention and connecting the technical team with the clinical team.
to truly transform, because too many times organizations, and it's not restricted to healthcare, but it's definitely in healthcare, they say they're going to do a transformation. We bought these companies, going to do the transformation. They never do. They do
Right.
just enough patches to get the solution. So now they're using the term future proofing because the transformations were never transformations. So you have to
Right.
make sure you actually did all of this cleaning up. But how are you actually balancing the innovation with compliance?
It's an interesting dilemma, honestly, but it really starts with, I mentioned trust earlier. Well, if your clinical experts don't trust the technology, the soundness and the quality of the data, you've got a really big problem. So, I think the most critical thing is think about everything through the trust lens, and it starts with the
Yep.
people you interact with every day. It's your colleagues, your physicians, your nurses, technicians, whatever. That has to be there right out of the gate, because I don't care how compliant it is. If no
Yep.
one trusts it, it's not going to matter. But you
And I
have to
think
look
it's a
at
lot.
both of those things together to really achieve what you ultimately want to achieve, which is very good adoption in a compliant, responsible manner.
Right, right. And at the end of the day, if you actually did the full transformation and the normalization so you have a clean data layer, then your access controls, what's what, all of that is clear defined. It gets twice as difficult if you didn't do that and you did
That's right.
patchwork, because then you're trying to make up for the fact that you never just created a clean virtual data layer, data fabric that
Right.
says who, what, where, when, why, how, and when, which gets your innovation and compliance covered. That also allows interoperability. And I know, Dr. Barry, you have some thoughts on how interoperability plays a role in successful AI. Love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, last I checked, it's 2025, and we still don't have interoperability. We talked about doing interoperability during meaningful use. What was that? Almost 20 years ago? We still don't have interoperability. The problem is that how are we able as a clinician to understand what is going on with you, the patient, right? Using any tool, but especially AI, without having all the information about you. I'm sure everybody who's watching this already has had an experience where they went to see one doctor, then they went to see a second one who might have been a specialist, and they could not get the x-rays, the lab reports, the pathology reports, all the things that are important for that specialist to actually decide and help you get your treatment. That is incredibly frustrating considering we spend 18% of GDP on healthcare. I work for tech companies. I can explain to you why there is no interoperability. The way to understand it is basically to understand if you go from a Mac to a PC, why does not all of your data from the phone, or from Android to Apple, iOS, why does that all not go well? Well, the reason it doesn't go well is the same reason it doesn't go well in the interoperability space. We have to fix this, and we have to fix this as soon as possible. The Office of the National Coordinator has been working on this problem for what? More than a decade, and they still have obstacles between whether it's the tech companies or the provider organizations. But even beyond that, we have problems with the semantics. I mean, if you have anemia, what type of anemia do you have? How do we describe it? How does every individual physician describe what that is or report it in their medical notes? And we have the issues around you write medical notes for billing, you don't write medical notes for clinical care. That's always secondary. Until we clean up this interoperability problem, training our models is going to be much more difficult. You just talked about the importance of having the data layer being perfect. Well, we got to clean up interoperability, then we have to clean up the issues around semantics, and we have to fix the idea of copying and paste and duplicating information that might exist in an electronic medical record that may be duplicative, or maybe duplicative that is actually also inaccurate. Again, getting back to what we just spoke about, it's all about the data. Let's make sure the data is good, make sure the data is clean, and make sure through interoperability that the data is complete.
And how do you build trust? Moving on to the ethics and trust area, how do you build trust among clinicians and patients when you're introducing those tools, Barry?
Well, most important thing is with the clinicians is to tell them how you built your system and what data you use, and is it representative of the patient population that I'm taking care of? Or did you just buy it off shelf from some vendor? You never really looked into the details of what trained their models, that trained their AI, and whether it's representative and how it would be used. Also, you have to include me in the processes that you designed to use the AI, because if you don't, it may slow my workflow down. How do I know that can happen? All you have to do is look at the history of implementing electronic medical records. Many organizations were motivated to implement their records very quickly so the tech company can recognize revenue and the organization's leadership can say, hey, we just spent $1 billion on this EMR, it works now. Well, you have to slow that process down, understand what is the actual workflow, what does a clinician do and the other caregivers do in taking care of that patient. What does the person do who admits the patient into the clinic, into the hospital? All those pieces are linked. You go ahead and take AI and just implement it. You're basically taking a new type of technology and not understanding how it may impact the actual workflow and the clinicians that are delivering the care. Relevant to patients, healthcare is the only industry in the world that has ever existed where you can go and see another person who can violate your body and you give them permission without saying yes. There's trust. When each of us walks into a clinic, a hospital, their provider's office, we don't go and look at their background check. We don't do a credit check on them. We inherently, unconditionally trust them. If you're a clinician in an organization, you understand your responsibility is to manage, take care of, nurture that trust. Because if you break that trust, not only may you hurt that patient, but in a lot of ways, you hurt them and maybe not trusting somebody else who can help them. So the patient has to be educated about the approaches we've taken to using the AI, show them that, share it with them, tell them how they could use it and how they shouldn't use it. But again, always recognizing that they inherently trust you and you have the responsibility to maintain and nurture that trust.
Are those the
Absolutely.
guardrails that you'd be hoping to look for, or is there any particular guardrails you'd love to see?
Well, anybody purchasing any AI tool that would use in a clinical, even non-clinical setting within a healthcare environment has to understand that they are going to buy this tool in a completely different way than they've ever bought anything else because of the power of the tool. So they have to spend the time to understand if the tool, if the AI was trained on information that is relevant to their organization, to their people, to their catchment area, to the patients that they treat, to make sure that it is going to give them suggestions and answers and guides and direct them in a way that is going to be useful. Here's our problem we have nationally, or actually internationally. The previous administration tried to put some guardrails on AI for purposes of safety. The current administration has removed those guardrails for a different safety purpose, which is national security. Those two things have to balance out. If you allow AI to explode and without any types of guardrails, it potentially can do some bad things. But at the same time, if we put some guardrails that are too constraining on it, it may allow various countries around the world may use that against us. So that's a very difficult balance that yours truly have no answer to. There are people smarter than me can figure that out. But relevant to the healthcare space, the organizations need to understand what type of safety and guardrails have put in place to make sure that the AI doesn't make errors. And I have to tell you right now, we don't know how to do that perfectly in any sphere, let alone in healthcare, but we do our best. So what should we do as a guardrail? Your clinician is your guardrail. The organization is going to choose the AI that they're going to use and they're going to implement it. Hopefully they implement it in a way where the physician, the caregiver, the nurse, and everyone else has a stop, meaning they have an opportunity to think about what they're doing. And those types of tools that potentially could be dangerous are not automated. In every flight you've ever been on, every pilot, no matter how experienced, has a checklist. Almost every surgical suite today has a checklist where anybody can stop the surgery because something doesn't look or feel right. We have to think of using AI in that same type of model.
Great suggestion. Susie, I'm sure you have some thoughts too in terms of how you build trust when
Yeah.
introducing the tools and any guardrails.
Yeah, thank you. And Barry, what you just mentioned at the end there too is a great segue, because, you know, we have to make sure that the technology that we are adopting on these units gives the tech or the nurse or the doctor the opportunity to pause. We don't want it to be doing all of our work, right? We don't want it to be so efficient that the nurse says, oh, okay, I can just sit back and let, the computer do everything or whatever it is that they're using. Because like you said, in reality, AI makes mistakes. It's not a human. It has no empathy. I know there are companies trying to, promote products that, ensure that there's empathy, but there really isn't. At the end of the day, the patient wants to see a human being. So the patient will be okay with a little bit of AI. At the end of the day, they will be, from what I've seen so far, depending on, where do you draw the line, right? So, we have to make sure that the patient feels like, okay, you're using this tool. All right, but I'm still going to see you every hour, right? I'm still going to see a person every hour. You're going to come in and you're going to literally look at me and assess me and listen to me. So making sure that the patient trusts that, you're utilizing the tools right and still keeping the human aspect, and that the staff have the autonomy and ability to say, wait, stop. I've been using this tool and I don't know what's going on, but something's not right. Like, it's telling me this, but I have an intuition right now that this is actually happening with the patient. We need to show the staff that we trust their clinical judgment more than the product. Can a certain product possibly detect something that a human couldn't? Sure. But at the end of the day, the staff need to feel like and know genuinely that they are the number one person that the patient can turn to, that their team can turn to, And, we can't forget that, because most of us go into healthcare because we truly want to save lives, take care of people that are hurting and in trauma situations. I personally know that, AI would be helpful for me if I was a bedside nurse in many ways, but man, do I love being at that bedside. The best part of my day is sitting next to a patient, whether it's at the end of life, whether it's after a tragic incident, whether it's, after a terrible diagnosis. A patient does not want to look at a computer and talk to someone or talk on the phone over a teleprompter thingy, to talk about their new diagnosis of cancer. Okay, so just making sure we have a nice mixture that complements each other. It's really going to go a long way with the staff. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about preventing bias? Because a lot of the AI models are trained on historical healthcare data. Chris, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, one of the first aha moments came when a conversation I was having with Dr. Chaikin. I was excited because I discovered when I build my own model, it gives me the ability to have perfect recall, but very, very wisely pointed out that it lacks context and why that is so important. Something that I may have thought or believed a decade ago, I may have an evolution in my thinking and realize by real life results that it's not quite the way I thought it is, and it has to be done differently now, right? So the context piece is important because what's in the historical data is fact. I'll give you a really great example that someone spoke to me about recently. If you ask AI, like I'm a data scientist, I got 20 years experience. I've been offered a job. What should I ask for a salary? The model's going to look at history, and then from a contextual standpoint, it's going to interpret whether it thinks you're male or female based on your voice. In historical data, it will tell you if it thinks you're a male that you should be expecting $400,000. If it thinks you're a female, it's going to tell you $280,000. We don't want to instantiate the facts. We have to have the context to make the adjustment. Now, fast forward and think about how this impacts things from a clinical standpoint. The critical piece we have to be aware of when it comes to bias, it's not just the data, it's the design. We've heard both of my colleagues here talk about needing to have those guardrails and those stop moments that are built into a workflow and a process so a human being is looking at it and making a judgment, and understanding whether there's missing information. And that's really a big issue for me. There's nefarious bias, which we are super focused on. We're laser focused. We're trying to find it and eliminate it wherever it might be. But missing information can be really, really on a basic level. A patient relationship with their provider, if there's no trust or if there's insecurity for any reason, sometimes it could be cultural, could be religious reasons, the patient doesn't feel comfortable to disclose certain information. Well, that information is not going to be in the model that you're training. Your model is training on only what it has. So human beings have to be aware that missing information is the same scenario that Dr. Chaikin will tell you exists today. He's looking at a patient. He's concerned about what he doesn't know, and if that thing that he doesn't know is important and would make a difference in the outcome for this patient. AI is not going to fix that issue. It can amplify it, or if we think about it properly, hopefully it can process enough information faster that it can reduce the risk that we've missed something.
Absolutely.
It's just not a check mark, though. I think that's the critical thing. It's a process and a workflow that has to be continuous. It's always
It takes
got
work
to be
to
learning.
keep bias out of systems, period. And
Right,
Barry,
that's
did
why
you
they
have some
call it-
thoughts on this?
That's why they call it practicing medicine, by the way. It's an evolving science. You have to
You
think
do
about
know that
AI
the
solutions
traditional
that way.
You do know the traditional joke of PhD versus MDs is we don't have to practice? Sorry. Go ahead, Barry.
I was just going to talk about bias. So many of you may know, but many of you may not know, if you go back about 25, 30 years ago, when the FDA would give out money for clinical trials. A lot of these clinical trials were done on white men. So if they were investigating, I'm going to make a silly analogy here. If they investigating the risk of having breast cancer and the data set was white men mostly, it probably would give you the wrong result. I think everybody can figure that thing out. So bias is a really big problem. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to be using AI in a small institution in a semi-rural area, and you got your data from Manhattan or from San Francisco or from Atlanta or New Orleans, it may not apply to your patients in that area. That's a big problem with bias. Also, the medical record has been created, again, secondarily for patient care, primarily for billing. Is billing really representative of patient care? And there may be things missing from the record. All of that can lead to bias in the model. So the model itself is the algorithms that process the data. It's the data that creates the problem. And you have to sometimes these data analysts and work to be able to correct those biases, but you always got to expect that it may be there. And that's why it's so important to have the clinician in the middle, because the clinician can say, this makes no sense with this particular patient, number one. Number two is, if you're going to purchase these types of things and use them, let's make sure you have a test set and you apply it against this test group of patients to see if it actually gives you the results that you might clinically expect or administratively expect, because we can think of dozens and dozens of things that impact things administratively, particularly socioeconomic classes and such. So, and cultural, all of that's really important. We got to, as my colleagues have said, we got to make sure that we're aware of the bias and do our best to mitigate its impact.
Excellent. And that does benefit everybody, because we want the insights to actually be helpful, not something that's counterproductive. We're going to jump over to patient-centered care. Admittedly, one of my favorite areas, for those not familiar, about a dozen years ago, I had started a company called Patient Forward. So every time you talk about patient first, I'm like, yes, bring that patient forward into the process. Be still my heart. So, Susie, how can AI support trauma-informed care and cultural sensitivity?
Sure. So something that, companies that are creating a certain product, no matter what it is, they need to keep in mind that in order to be successful, they should have a good amount of clinicians that have practiced in healthcare for a good amount of time on their team. Because, you're not going to have success with your product if you don't have an end user that has used these things, right, and has had these experiences as both a patient and a healthcare worker. So I think that we have to make sure that if your product is not trauma informed and the staff that are working for that company are not trauma informed, and then you're going to try to sell a product or a technology without having any knowledge of what trauma informed care and language is, then you're actually not going to gain the trust of the leadership that you're presenting the product to. So for instance, the company that I previously worked for, I personally trained every single staff member in trauma-informed care and language, which was super helpful for them, because most of the team are not healthcare workers. They are IT, they are engineers, and some of them had never even known not to say certain things in meetings, right? So you're meeting with a child psychiatry unit, and you're trying to promote an AI product that helps to prevent harm, the patient, self-harm or whatever. You have to be careful about how you talk about these patients in this population. You have to word things the right way, or you're going to offend people. And so having a team that is building a product that knows how to handle difficult conversations around suicide and self-harm and end of life and all that, is just going to add credibility to your product and your company. If I was a leader and you're trying to do a presentation for me and you have zero idea how a hospital floor is run, and you have no respect for, not saying it's disrespect, but it's obvious that you have no real knowledge of what we go through on a daily basis, you're really not going to get far with me. And then making sure that the staff that are utilizing the product, if you, say you do go with a certain technology, that they themselves are trauma informed. Trauma informed care has not been around very long in terms of the term and the education that goes with it. So for instance, I've been a nurse for 25 years. No one talked about that in college. No one talked about it in training in any of the jobs I had. No leadership ever just, discussed it. You kind of just hit the ground running as a new grad, and you I personally can speak to my own traumas along the way and PTSD from dealing with situations where nobody prepared me. They just kind of said, here's your assignment. Good luck. They are very sick, and I'm not going to give detailed examples, but really tragic, awful scenarios that I've had to deal with myself in like a dark room on a night shift. With no preparation, no, hey, you might see this, let me know if you need support. Call me if you need that. There was really none of that. So now that we have, trauma-informed care is really in the forefront. I'm part of an organization that we're trying to get 1 million trauma-informed clinicians by 2032, which we know is going to happen because the numbers are already increasing. But it's just so critical that we incorporate trauma-informed care in everything we do, and also not just for the patient, but for the staff. So making sure as a leader that you are acknowledging that staff are coming in to work to take care of traumatized patients or patients that are going through an acute crisis, and they are absorbing that trauma daily, hourly. On a given shift, a 12-hour shift, you could absorb 6 to 7 to 12 different types of traumas, in scenarios. And they're carrying that burden and then trying to also support the patient. So I will continue to hone in on, if you do not support your staff and make sure they are psychologically safe and that they feel like they can come to you for anything, then you're going to have a pretty toxic unit, a unit that just doesn't have trust. So yeah, I could talk forever about trauma-informed care. So
it's definitely an important area, because the last thing you want to do is make the situation worse.
yeah.
Barry, what do you think is the best way to communicate AI-driven decisions to a patient transparently?
Tell them what you're doing.
Yep.
Don't BS it. Actually show them a little bit about it. And it's a teaching moment for them on how they might be able to use AI for themselves safely. But be totally transparent. Tell them, you've heard a lot about AI. We've tested in our organization. We only use AI that was trained to take care of patients like you. We have a process where every clinician has a stop in using the AI. And our focus in using AI is not to replace me, the clinician, or the people taking care of you. What we are doing is we're using the AI the same way a physician first used a stethoscope. In the old days, before a stethoscope, the physician used to take his ear and put it against the chest of the person. Back in Victorian days, that was a little problematic, considering women didn't really like men putting their ear against their chest, even if they were a clinician. The invention of the stethoscope allowed that problem to disappear, but it also enhanced the ability of the physician to hear what was going on in the heart. As time went on, we learned more about the heart. We learned more about the importance of those sounds. AI is the same thing. It's just a very sophisticated, very technically based tool like the stethoscope that enhances the skill and knowledge and experience of your clinician. You, the patient, use it. Learn about your disease. Don't, again, use it for your therapy or your treatment. If you have a question about something, go ahead and ask me, your doctor, and I'll work hard to explain it to you. But it's a partnership. The AI is my partner to help me to treat you, and you, the patient, you're my partner to help me to treat you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to add to that too. Also letting the patient know they have choices. They have a choice to say no to certain things. I think a lot of the times we have this technology that staff even feel like every patient has to use it. We are using this product, they have to use it. Well, at the end of the day, as much as it probably will benefit the patient, they do have a right to speak up about what they're not comfortable with. And it could be that I don't want that in my room. And if they're mentally safe enough, we would have to take that out, and respect what they want. So making sure that patients have a say and that we don't violate their rights as well. I would add that.
So last question, what's the most exciting AI innovation you've seen? And what do you think is going to be the biggest breakthrough by 2030? Susie, you can go with AI innovation you've seen.
All right. So, well, I'm a little biased because I have utilized a wonderful product, word salad, in my previous role as a nurse manager in a psychiatry unit. But I can also state that, that product itself, there's also many others similar or that offer the same things, but then extra, stuff. So each of these products kind of have their own positives, and some of them have negatives, right? Some of these technologies do have cameras and noises that happen and voices that talk to you to sit back in bed. I personally am always about like the less intrusive, the better. So anything that you can bring to the table that is literally the smallest thing on the wall that no one can see, the patient can't really tell it's there. It's not that you're hiding it. You're obviously going to tell the patient what you have. But having this massive block on a wall or something blinking at you or talking to you can be quite scary. I'm not saying that in certain instances it's not helpful, but what I've seen the biggest successes in is that these products are in the background working 24/7 to monitor the patient's safety, okay? So we can monitor, the actual emotional safety of a patient, right? We can go into the room, do our assessments, talk with the patient, cry with them, do all the things that the human can do. While in the background, 24/7, these products are monitoring for pacing, falling, elopement, seizures, all these things that it's not that we can't detect them, but at the end of the day, we're not in the room 24/7. We go in, some staff, I had to beg and push for hourly rounding, and staff would say, well, I've obviously been in the room more than I've been in there more than just every hour, but is it purposeful rounding, right? And
Got it.
I could go on for hours about that. You can go in a room 27 times in an hour, but if you're not addressing anything, then that really doesn't count. Or you could go in once an hour and really hone in on what's going on.
For last minute, because we're almost out of time. Barry, did you have a prediction for the biggest AI breakthrough in 2030?
Yes, I do. I've been involved in this charity event called the PAMS Challenge. We raise money for cancer for the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. So I'm familiar with a lot of the cancers that have been treated. 10 years ago, these various lymphomas were treated with bone marrow transplants and horrible chemotherapy. And today they're treated with monoclonal antibodies, simple pill that you take once or twice a day. And you're fine and you get in remission or you even get cured. I even have a friend of mine who was cured by one of these type of miracle drugs. Because of AI, we could now do clinical trials in silicon, in a computer. How that advances dramatically our ability for medical research is just incredible. So in the next 5 years, you're going to see one after another of these breakthrough treatments, particularly for cancer, but for many other diseases, so that when I first went to medical school, 85 to 90% of kids who had acute lymphocytic leukemia died, and today over 90% of them live. That'll happen for
Wow.
so many dozens and dozens of cancers. We'll be able to say in 5 years that cancer is mostly, not completely, mostly a chronic disease. And then in 50 years, we maybe won't cure it, but nobody will actually die from it.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Chris, last minute. Hopes for 2030.
Contextual awareness. We could talk about the interoperability pieces of it. It's really essential, but the context-aware AI is really something I think is going to be a huge milestone. So incorporating things like social determinants, environmental factors, language access, digital equity into the care planning, getting these things connected and be able to process enormous amounts of information at light speed so that Dr. Chaikin and Susie provide well-informed care in the moment that they're facing a patient. That excites me. So I think that means we've hit the point where we're giving back time to the caregivers in an environment where their psychological safety is clear and they are free to do the things that motivated them and gives them the passion that drove them to go and train to do what they do.
Well-informed, hyper-personalized care is the hope. Can't wait for it. I cannot thank our panelists enough, and have an amazing day. This has been a fantastic panel. Thank y'all.